Hi, my name is Sarah.
My name is Mujib.
And welcome to another episode of Let's Get To It. This is episode 15. And give it up. And we're calling this one Written in the Stars. And I'm gonna pass the ball to Mujib because this is Mujib's brainchild. So why don't you set it up for us?
Totally. I just think to myself oftentimes how a lot of my energies will wax and wane with the seasons, right? So if I'm feeling super vibrant and everything like that in the summertime, I'll look at it at the date and I'll be like, oh, it's actually almost the equinox, or the solstice. So we're almost at that longest day of the year. Or the wintertime, I'm feeling specifically gloomy on December day, and I'm like, well, what's going on? It's like, oh, actually, this is the shortest day of the year. So that's kind of how it started for me. The idea of written in the stars was trying to see those times when what was going on astrologically or universally were actually affecting my mood. And in Vermont, it can be so particular because we have this kind of wintertime depression or the seasonal depression that comes with it. And we don't necessarily oftentimes realize well, maybe there's a star that is typically your shining star that in Vermont would be shining in the summertime that isn't really shining in the wintertime, because the night sky changes and things like that. So that kind of got me thinking around this specific time period, especially with some energies that I'm dealing with right now, and just understanding that we all share so much commonality here being on Earth in the universe. So maybe some other people out there are also feeling the season change or something about the way that the stars are configured, that it just feels like things are happening on a larger scale.
Yeah. I love that. I love that we're going to sort of dip our toes into the metaphysical and sort of astrology and things like that. And it's really kind of a spirituality. Whether I'm very open with my clients, I'll tell them that I have a psychic, I have an intuitive that I go see regularly, or at least 2 times a year, that I find really, grounds me and helps kind of set up the year for me. So, whether or not people are surprised to hear that, but usually when I open up and I share that, I've had several people, come up to me after classes and say, oh, who is it that you go see? Because it sparks an interest in them that they might be looking for some kind of guidance.
Totally. I feel like we all have these moments of intuition or these hunches that we feel, and how, whether or not it's a part of somebody's personal culture, it's going to dawn on us all. If you could have a fortune teller sit in front of you and be like, this is 100% actually the truth that this person's going to tell you, most of us would probably say oh yeah, tell me something, share something with me, some insight about me that I might not be seeing. And it's just like anything else. You go to a doctor to ask a doctor, what does this mark on my arm mean? And the doctor tells you it's nothing, or it's something that you should look deeper into. We go to any number of consults for all sorts of different things. So why not go to intuitives as well to say you are actually skilled at looking at the way that the universe is working. You're skilled at looking at what's happening in the stars right now. I'm feeling a certain way. Maybe you could share something with me. I also have an astrologer that I communicate with now, just new, but often now. I really like working with this person. And the whole deal is I can sit down and say, I watched the moon rise this morning, and as I'm watching the moon rise, I saw this star come out right before the moon, and I feel like I keep seeing that one specific really bright star. What is that? And that person can say, oh, it's not a star, it's Jupiter. And I'd be like, oh, wow, what does that mean? And they're like, well, let me tell you something about where Jupiter is in your chart. And then for me, it has that opportunity to have somebody look at the same sky that I'm looking at, but they have a different language for how to read that sky, and they can say this is what that constellation is, and this is where it's going to be on your birthday versus in the middle of the year, or something like that.
Yeah, I with sort of times being as uncertain and perhaps anxiety provoking as this year has been, I know in particular, I had a reading over the summer and just felt like I needed to be grounded somewhat or be given a helpful roadmap. That's kind of how I look at it. And how I feel about the whole thing is often, I think I have a pretty decently tuned internal compass for the most part, that I've worked on throughout the years. I think I've mentioned this before in previous episodes. We've all got that compass, but you got to work on tuning it and listening to it, sharpening it, and so on. So I often feel like I'll have a session And some of my thoughts and feelings will sort of be confirmed, even if it's, sometimes you just kind of want to know, I've been feeling this way, and then someone gives you that affirmation or some validation of that feeling or something you were thinking about. And then sometimes it opens my mind to other pathways, be on the lookout for this, or one thing that my intuitive is great for doing for me is setting up sort of windows of opportunity, because the universe is all about timing and alignment of, where certain stars are, how things are lined up for you. And, she'll talk about what she calls reward cycles or other things, like now's a good time to ask for what you want. Now's a good time to, fill in the blank. And I have really, for the last 6 years of my life, really relied on some of that sort of just guidance, and it's been helpful for me to make some decisions and take action on certain things.
I love that aspect of like the help to take action. Like I'm feeling like I should do this thing right now, but the timing doesn't quite feel right. Let me call this person who I trust on and let me see what they're going to tell me. And they're like, well, actually the timing isn't right at all. The timing would be much better a week from now.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, well, I felt that. And then we can, like you said, kind of tune it up and get in tune with that and sharpen that sense that we have. I also think about it in the sense of sometimes fighting against certain energies, right? So for me right now, I'm coming out of this time of intense self-care, right? So that's been what this past cycle of like moon cycle has been about for me, essentially. Like this summer coming into now into the fall was really much about like take care of yourself. And we talk about self-care oftentimes. So again, there might be something in the entirety of the universe that's telling me now is the time for you to take that extra 15 minutes in the morning and do something for yourself. Now is the time to take that slower bit of time and like get something nice for yourself, right? If I was to put that off and to fight that and to go this way against that and to try to like create restriction around that, then maybe I'm actually winding myself up, because what I'm really supposed to be doing is chilling out, but I'm trying to go as fast as I can possibly go.
Yeah.
And then understanding that there's going to be a break where this time for my self-care is going to click over into this next phase or season that's going to say, actually, no, now you have to work and you're not going to have time for the self-care. This is the time that you're going to have to put your head down and you're going to have to, you're going to have to spend your time studying, not meditating. You know what I mean? So then it's to know that, oh, well, I was feeling that actually. I was feeling that there was a specific time around Halloween where I didn't have the same desires to do the same things that I was doing. My desires now are like, do this certain thing, study this page or read this book versus like read this book or look at this like exciting article or whatever. And sometimes that type of energy, knowing that that's going on, can help us to say, hey, now is the time. It's kind of written in the stars to chill out, or it's time written in the stars to like hit it hard.
So a couple of things coming to mind for me as I'm listening to you, and so this is going to kind of veer into an interesting kind of heavy topic, because one thing I know we've talked a lot about is faith, right? Faith over fear, having faith in either that things are going to work out or that you're going to take action to do it. And I've been thinking a lot about, I don't know how our listeners feel, but, I'm sure we have listeners of all different faiths, right? Traditional, non-traditional, what have you. And, a lot of people will talk about astrology as sort of, this new age, I think that's still a terminology. Maybe it's outdated, right? The new age category in the bookstore. And I wonder if, metaphysics is in conflict with sort of more traditional Christian or Muslim faith or Jewish faith, or they dovetail each other. I'm someone that I consider myself to be a very spiritual person. I'm not a physical churchgoer, personally. But I just kind of wonder about kind of squaring those two things, and if that is ever a conflict for people, or if people, do you have a sense and belief in a God and also the stars, or are those one and the same? Or
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Because for me, in that intersection, like I was raised in Islam, so I was raised as a Muslim, but my folks, as I've said before, are from all these different denominations, even to the fact that the folks who I grew up with around Islam are all kind of practicing different expressions of Islam. Like I might know a Naqshbandi Muslim who follows the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and their siblings or their that person's wives and things like that, so that they carry themselves a certain way. The men all shave their heads bald and they put a white turban on, and they try to have a green kufi under the turban. So like that's really specific. But then you have somebody who might just be like like a Sufi mystic style of Muslim, and they're still going to sweat lodges and they're still taking part in their indigenous ceremonies because they've intertwined their indigeneity with their kind of Eastern religion or Eastern philosophies. What really kind of allowed me to open up into astrology was the fact that Ramadan and Eid are they're celestial events. It's when the moon and the star, when the crescent moon is a certain way and a star is a certain place on that crescent moon, that's the month that we fast. So that month can be in August, but it can be in January. And so for me, I started to see wow, within Islam, within Arabian just navigation alone, they were really using the stars and using the cosmos to direct us. And then you bring us to the U.S., where you hear the Follow the Drinking Gourd and the North Star, that storyline that comes with people escaping the South and going to the North, let alone thinking about the actual indigenous people that were here, that were always moving based on the seasons and planting based on the seasons and hunting based on the moon cycles and so on and so forth. And then a whole nother side of my generational ancestry that are seafaring people. So those people are also attached to the moon cycles, attached to the stars, attached to the tides and the way that they move with the moon, so on and so forth. So I think that for me, when it comes to religion, spirituality, and then this level of mysticism, I really was fortunate enough and have been fortunate enough to not have the restrictions around my own self or the people around me saying that, no, you can't access the magic of this world. Instead of being actually, all these things that we talk about, angels and deities and God and devils and, all these different things, that can all be seen as spirituality or mysticism or magic, depending on whose lens it's coming through. So, if you were to take a 19th century priest and you were to be like, I see angels every day, and that priest was to say or Puritan priest at that was to say well, that we need to burn you, on your forehead or something like that. That's all, again, that might deter you from being I see angels every day. It might make you say oh, I'm crazy or something like that, versus in that person's faith, there are angels in the faith, So I think a lot of the times what we do, and one of the hardest things that we can do as humanity, is to separate ourselves from the magic that is religion or spirituality and say, that walking on water thing was a thing of the past, or that believing in something and seeing a miracle is just something I hear about in storybooks. But in reality, if I look at intuition, if I look at the way that the right thing happens at the right time, those things can really actually start to look pretty miraculous.
Oh, I love that. I just got goosebumps. That's awesome. I really did. I love that. It's making me think of a pretty hefty spiritual experience I had right before COVID. And I mean, immediately before COVID, or really probably in it, but before kind of the entire world caught fire, I guess. I was lucky enough to be in Costa Rica, and I think I've shared this with you previously, that I took part in a sweat lodge ceremony with a shaman of the Lakota tradition. And it was pretty amazing and eye-opening, and something that I had not been exposed to a lot of indigenous traditions, but was very excited to experience this sort of full body and mind experience. And one of the things, actually one of the biggest things I took away from it was the question that was asked to the women prior to the ceremony was if any of us were on our blood moon. And translation is, does anyone have their period out there? And that's something that is certainly in the West and communities I come from, very uncomfortable topic to talk about. Still in 2020, we seem to not be comfortable with even saying the word period, menstruation, blood, vagina. People are just, still, which is insane, I think. Right. And and so this was the opening question. We had several women taking part in the ceremony, and it turned out that we were a small group, relatively small group, but three of us, happened to be on our cycle. And the shaman, so someone might think, oh my God, what a personal question. But this was really, really important because the sweat lodge ceremony is a sun ceremony, and we were providing moon energy. So we were sort of in direct opposition. So the shaman was basically like, oh boy, I have my work cut out for me because there's three of these moon energies. And the question was not to shame any of us, make us feel bad, guilty, or otherwise. It was to provide, he needed to know in order to provide the ceremony to sort of muster up as much strength as possible, because my takeaway from this is he was just super empowering. He was like, all right, you guys are incredibly powerful right now. You may not even realize how much power you have and the type of energy that you're giving off, so I'm gonna have to like really work like crazy in this ceremony. And so we were asked to collect flowers, find a red flower out in nature, and ask Mother Earth permission to pick the flower first of all, and then be thankful for it, and then we had to sit on the flower in the lodge, and that was to dampen some of our energy in terms of being less confrontational to the ceremonial energy. And so all of that to say again that it was a really empowering experience. It wasn't disempowering from the side of being female. I didn't feel singled out or embarrassed. And so that may be surprising to some, but it was kind of like, let's just talk about our energies and talk about, this is a natural process, and there's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's part of being a woman and giving life. And there's a lot of, I know Mujib and I have talked separately about, there's a lot of pelvic energy, and energy in that area, and we should be so, proud of these things, and that's just part of what it is to be human, or part of what it is to be feminine and female. So anyway, it was really an amazing experience at the end of the day. But yeah, I hadn't, as a Western white woman, had not felt so proud of my menstruation as I was in that moment. Wow. So that was interesting for me. I don't know how other ladies listening are feeling about that, but yeah, I suddenly was like, I'm on my period, y'all. Yes. And normally we're as women, we're not taught to even really talk about it. Even today, I'm a grown woman, and I have you guys know this by now, in my fitness studio, I'll have other grown women previously, before COVID, come up to me and whisper, do you have a tampon? Like, they're asking for illicit drugs or something. Like, yeah, I have a tampon. You can have it. It's really amazing. I don't, I'm not out to blame or shame anybody, but it's what a terrible position that we as women feel bad about that. So, linking it back to the astrological power of the moon and cycles. I mean, whew.
Right.
Anyway, that was a long story.
I love it though. I love how it talks about the empowerment. Like, again, if we think about a blood cycle or a menstruation cycle as a monthly event that's based on the days of the month, that's based on the months of the year, that's all based on the stars and the moon and the sun, then we say that it is a cosmic event, and I think a lot about life creation and about bringing life into the world and things like that, and our ability to create life, right? And the flip side of that coin, just from my perspective as a male, oftentimes comes with like the seminal energy and things like that, and how, again, societal norms kind of tell us all these different things about what we're meant to do and what my sperm is for, and so on and so forth. But if I look to older traditions, then I see people that are saying, well, actually, your seminal energy is for way more than just making babies. Like, if you're ejaculating millions of sperm and only one of those sperm needs to go into one egg, then is all of that sperm actually just for making humans, or can you use it to replenish your own energy by thinking of the ways of not depleting your energy, by thinking of ways of like not just like coming just randomly, or not randomly, but you know what I mean, like just excessively or whatever, but in fact like not treating our own bodily fluids again as if they're just waste products, or as if they're, you know, just something to be like used and thrown away, you know what I mean? Whereas like, take your period blood, pour it in your houseplant, see what it does, right? Mix it with a little bit of water, pour it in your houseplants. Like, it's going to make your houseplants more healthy because your period blood has actual energy and vitamins and minerals that come out of it. And it's not necessarily the same as like, we're going to drink that, even though I know some women that might take a sip of it from time to time or something like that, which again, this kind of goes into the realm of like mysticism at that point in time. This is the sort of stuff that like, you know, the Christian Puritans were like, well, that's devil worship, you know, or something like that, where in reality it's like, no, this is first of all, this is somebody's individual experience that has nothing to do with the constraints of society. It should have nothing to do with like me as a man telling you as a woman what you're supposed to do with your period blood, right?
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
End of story, right?
Yes, thank you.
So with that said, again, it just goes back into empowering ourselves. And from my standpoint as a male, it goes into learning more about where that power comes from and tying that back into the universe. There are times when that sexual potency is up, and then there are times when that sexual potency comes down. And again, knowing when we can be available for each other, right? Because again, sexual potency doesn't necessarily have to just equate to intercourse, right? Sexual potency can equate to creative energy. Oh, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write an article. I'm going to make a song. I'm going to go out and just walk around and be like happy and up, you know, because I know that at some point that wave is going to come back down, and I'm going to have to be more quiet, or I'm going to lose my muse, or I'm going to have writer's block or something like that. So it's all these different like ways that we ourselves are kind of like, I was thinking about it this morning as far as being like the ocean, you know, we have this fluid in our bodies, whether it's blood, whether it's, you know, seminal energy, whatever it's going to be, that's just like moving just like the tides of the ocean, you know, and we well up, and it has these energies that hit us, and then we expel it, you know what I mean? And then we go through the cycle again of it welling up and then expelling it. While at the same time, if we can watch our cycles, right? If I can know when my creative energy is going to be up, then I can plan for that. Right? I can know on that full moon, on that waxing moon, I'm going to be able to put a lot of good creative energy into the world. And when I hit that full moon, I'm going to be able to peak with it. And then as that moon goes back to waning and goes back to the new moon, I know personally through my interaction with my energies around the moon and the lunar cycles that I'm going to start coming down until today, which is that waning crescent, rose right with the sun at the same time, just about like right before the sun. I know that that's where the peak of my energy is going to be, just in that little waning crescent, you know what I mean? Versus then it's going to go to new. I'm going to be able to be muted, right? If I'm having an argument with my wife, we're going to look at is it the new moon? Yeah, it's the new moon. Okay.
What's
Sit
Mercury
back
doing?
For a second, you know what I mean? Because with the new moon, it's dark. It's like pitch black out. If you've ever been out in the forest in the new moon, you can barely see your hand in front of your face, you know, especially if there are no stars in the sky. So to think about, that's where we're going to try to see clarity between each other. Maybe we're not supposed to see clarity between each other when the new moon. Let's take advantage of the fact that you're feeling a little tired, I'm feeling a little bit tired, it's kind of dark out, let's just take it down a notch. And then watch our energy kind of come back together with the moon, things like that. So again, that stuff can be seen as mysticism. It can be seen as counter religious. But all at the same time, those religions are based on the stars and the mystics that were telling people a woman shall begot a son, you know what I mean, and things like that. So that's all mysticism in its own right. With this country particularly, we have all of those intersections, like you said, like a Lakota tradition sweat lodge board for you, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can say, oh yeah, I've been a Lakota tradition sweat lodge too. So we have all these intersections of belief structures. America, the United States of America, is really like a beautiful place in that, right, that we have this religious freedom, quote unquote, to be able to say like, here's an atheist sitting at the same table with an agnostic, sitting at the same table with a Muslim, sitting at the same table with a Jew, sitting at the same table with a Christian. And it's just like this whole, if those people can elevate to a human level, can actually just have a conversation about the differences in their beliefs. But what happens more times than not, they end up back to the similarity of their belief structure, because we're all on the planet Earth in the middle of the universe, regardless of what we believe. You know, so again, it's coming back to that, what is written in the stars, like where are we in the universe right now, and how can we relate that to what we're doing here on the ground.
I love that. And just speaking about that, I'm reminded by a beautiful tradition that I'm lucky to take part in. My partner is from Iran, and so he's Persian. And one of the greatest things I find about Iranian traditions is to celebrate Nowruz in the new year. And the new year follows this is with the spring equinox, which to me makes so much sense, instead of January 1st, which
Right.
often just seems quite random at times. And this was a couple of years ago. We invited several friends to celebrate Nowruz at our home. And it was just as you said. There were Muslims, there were Jews, there were Christians, I'm sure there was an atheist, and certainly agnostic. And it was beautiful. We came together over food and a celebration of the days getting longer and spring and sort of life returning. And it was amazing. It was one of the greatest evenings I think we had, and opened our home, and that was sort of the point. It wasn't, it was an interfaith, celebration of just being, being on this planet, and that was really great. So. Yeah, shout out to any Persians listening, or Nowruz is celebrated widely around the world. It's not just a Persian tradition, but it's one of my favorite celebrations, for sure. And so we look forward to that. So that's in March.
Now, did you grow up with annual traditions as a part of your life upbringing? And have like any specific relationship with those things?
Yeah, I grew up in a sort of a more of an agnostic household with the kind of more commercially American available traditions, if I can put it that way. So my father was baptized Catholic. My mother, maybe she's Protestant. She didn't particularly grow up in a religious household, but both from New England, and they chose not to baptize me. So depending on where you fall on sort of a religious spectrum, either I'm doomed or not. So I didn't grow up with any religious education. In school, we flirted with a couple of different churches. I'm from Brattleboro, Vermont, and there's some great places of worship that are interfaith, and so I was exposed a little bit to that. And then as I got older, and my parents are divorced and both have remarried. My father, when he remarried, he recommitted to his Catholicism, and church every Sunday, and
Wow.
Mass and other things, and is also very involved in that community. And so sometimes over the years, my dad would sort of invite me into his Catholicism worship, and which I politely declined, just as a matter of I just choose not to worship in that way. And then my boyfriend is, he was born in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and raised somewhat, Muslim, and the Quran, but by choice is, I would call him agnostic. So, as we've kind of become a family unit, the two of us, I've sort of taken on more Persian traditions, not necessarily Islamic traditions, but some of the traditional Persian celebrations, which are not necessarily culturally the same as Islamic holidays, or Muslim holidays, I should say. So yeah, I'm kind of I'm a little bit all over the place, and I'll break bread with anyone as long as their mind is open. That's kind of like my, my smell test is, I love gospel music, for example. So like I could get down with like, maybe some very Baptist music, but so it's like all kinds of things. I'm very open. Again, I've done some indigenous traditions and other things, and then I find a lot of solace and spirituality and mysticism and astrology. So I'm a little bit all over the map.
Perfect, yeah.
Which I like. I think it's all of this is very personal, and when we've talked about always, I feel like a recurring theme is this theme of self-discovery and knowing thyself, and this is kind of one of those things. And if whether it's strictly religion, if you want to say that word, or it's spirituality or whatever helps you come to terms with things about yourself, I personally don't want to be part of something that tells me you can't be who you are.
Right.
That's sort of my line in the sand.
Right.
So I'm not going to enter into something that says, either that puts me in a box that says, because you came out a woman, then this is your societal role. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like, I'm not going to fly with that.
Right.
So I definitely just gravitate towards more of the Zoroastrianism is just a beautiful religion. One of the first religions in the world. And again, coming out of, Middle East. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm sort of all about us just all vibing on one another.
Right. I think that's the thing about 2020, and I think that's a beautiful thing about where we are as a human race, is that you have, I'd oftentimes think about these holy days or powerful days that, might be a Christian religion, but then falls on the same day as some other religious mm-hmm. experience, right? Even something as simple as like the sort of like Samhain or the Halloween mm-hmm. or the Day of the Dead, like how so many different cultures believe, like at that end of October going into November, this end of that summertime, fall time, going into this next season of fall to the winter time, there's this moment when the veil goes thin, and then we go back in the other direction. And that's not just one spiritual faith, or that's not just one faith-based experience from one part of the world. That's something that as we travel around the world, we realize like a lot of different cultures might have these intersections or these overlaps. So it just is only natural that, especially here in the States, that we take from a lot of mm-hmm. different, well, I'll say it like this actually. Depending on who you are, mm-hmm. it's only natural that we take from a lot of different pools or a lot of different fountains to fill up our own bucket, right? Because mm-hmm. it's essentially, again, like you said, it's knowledge of self. It's being able to, spirituality for me is like it's an interaction with my own spiritual experience, mm-hmm. and it's connecting with folks that might be having their own spiritual experiences. What that spiritual experience is based on our own personal experiences in life, right? Mm-hmm. So it's based on my history, who I was raised by, what they told me, and then what I chose to hold on to and create my truth structures out of.
Yeah.
That might mean sprinkling a little bit of sand somewhere. It might mean throwing salt over my shoulder or something like that. But again, just trying to find those common themes for myself that say, well, it's in a lot of cultures to favor the right side versus the left side, or vice versa, to favor the left side versus the right side, or things like that. So to just try to understand like how to find a more, what's the way that I'm going to put this? Basically, how to find a more direct roadmap for how to exist on this world, on this planet, as human beings.
I like
right?
that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And for some people, it is like Islam. Mm-hmm. Islam has helped a lot of people who would have otherwise. What I find is it's not Islam, period. Like it fill in the blank. It could be Catholicism, it could be Judaism, it could be Buddhism, it could be becoming agnostic, it could be any of these things, fill in the blank. But oftentimes there's a point where somebody has to make a decision between doing something that's going to be detrimental to themselves and their communities, or finding some sort of spiritual practice that pulls them away from that, right? So with Islam and felons, it happens a lot in the States, where you have like black men who get locked up in prison, and then all of a sudden, like, their only way that they can find God is by this religion that tells them that, hey, there's nothing wrong with you, actually. So again, that ability to see that here's something that can say, like, this is where you are in the world, this is where you fit in the university, and there's nothing wrong with you, so that you can kind of come to God through this light, through this angle, through this door. I love the interfaith churches idea. I love, again, being from DC, you have, I grew up in a community of Muslims that lived right next door to a community of Jews. So it was like, you know, on Friday we're celebrating, on Saturday they're celebrating, on Sunday these guys are celebrating over here. So it's just like you have these different religions or these different expressions of spirituality, but that are intertwining again. And again, to bring it back to the stars, are most likely based on some level of cosmic activity, you know. So I love that. Now, one of the real reasons why I wanted to bring this whole topic up was that idea of like hunches and that idea of intuitions and getting this almost like divine intervention that happens in our lives that says, you know, go this way or don't go that way or stop here or go fast, you know, one of those different like moments in time. And I know for myself, like I have a lot of interaction with that energy, that intuitive energy. I'm asking myself constantly, like, what is the story behind the story? Like, what does this feeling inside of me actually mean? Like, I was thinking about how to describe to a child why it's not a bad thing to be nervous about something, right? Nervous. If I just think about the word into itself, it's like nerve activity. Like my nerves are standing up on end, right? So what is my body actually trying to tell me right now about this situation? Is it trying to tell me that I need to like fold up and fall over? Or is it just telling me that I need to open my eyes a little bit more, so on and so forth? So those constant like communications with oneself that says, what is the universe trying to tell me right now through this language that I'm speaking to myself, that is intuition or a hunch. So I'd ask, you know, do you also interact with that type of like just trusting yourself, trusting your own intuition energy?
Yeah. You know, I love that you're bringing this up, because I think that Western medicine has done humanity such a disservice by over-medicating our being. So, you know, to have, you know, is people suffering from anxiety or depression or other things. These are very real things, and this is not to negate these feelings. But often, I think what we've done is quick to say, oh, you're feeling this way? Don't feel that way. Here's a pill. And when we can use I've often said, I probably, if I had been born much later, again, shout out to 1983, may very well have been told I have some kind of ADHD or hyperactivity thing. I've never taken medication for these things. I exercise like a fiend. I need exercise. I have a lot of excess energy constantly. I have a lot of brain activity, and I've found outlets for that naturally to sort of to work through that ebb and flow. Or if you feel yourself maybe having what we might call a panic attack, how we might use breath or sort of figure out what is my body telling me? And I'm saying these things, I'm not a medical doctor. I don't have any specific training other than I'm a human being. And I'm a ball of energy, and just like you're a ball of energy, right? So when I hear you say, like, you know, teaching, you know, potentially your son or a child, you know, when you have the butterflies, when you have the hair stand on end, if last week was anxiety ridden for you, election week in this country last week, or even if it still is, you know, there's a reason why our body with these nerve endings, like this is information that we're tapping into the universe. I am definitely one of those people that believes, you know, if a butterfly is flapping its wings somewhere, like that energy reverberates. I think, what is that called? The butterfly effect, I think. So yeah, I think the more we can learn about these signs that come into the body and how to navigate them. And that's not to say, I really want to put it out there, that's not to say that there are not sort of clinical scenarios where some form of medication may be, in fact, life-saving for folks.
Right,
so I want to put that out there. But I think there's a lot of in-between that can be managed through breath and through nutrition and through exercise and movement and just, you know, keening into this intuition. So to answer your question finally, yes, absolutely. I mean, I really do think, again, about this internal compass. I know when I'm going down the wrong path. I can feel it, and I can feel it throughout my body when something doesn't feel right, or it just feels like, you know, the feeling of like that you're just pushing this boulder uphill constantly, and you're like, something's off here. Why should this feel, not that things are going to feel easy, but, or you just get that feeling in the pit of your stomach, or, all of these things and signs. Or when you make a decision and you feel sort of a relief wash over you, or things start to, there's a calmness that comes to you. Yes, I absolutely believe that, and I felt that in my professional life, in my personal life, and all segments of my life, like having to make some decisions based on, if you want to call them those gut feelings.
Right.
The gut is a very telling part of our body.
Yeah. And what a beautiful time to be born, in that, like, now all of these sciences are backing these things up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's, there's a kind of philosophy, or like a philosophical structure that I came across recently, or in the past 5 years, but it's, it was basically introduced to like the white American essentially in like the 40s or whatever, but it's this idea of the power of your thought, right? The power of your mind, and the fact that not just in the sense of what we talk about oftentimes, which is visualization and being able to like kind of like quote unquote manifest what you want by being able to see it in time when it's not actually in existence yet, and work towards that. But what I mean more of is actually like the fact that we're only using a percentage of our brains on a regular basis. Like we're only ever using so much of our actual body, of our actual awareness. Like I can't be aware of everything at the same time, or else my mind would kind of lose itself. Like if I took the second to kind of like count every single line on that grate on the vent or something like that, even though my brain, I can see that out of the corner of my eye, I can look at it, I can count them individually, boom, 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 boom. But if my brain was trying to do that at the same time that I'm having a conversation with you, at the same time that it's trying to decipher what's your jacket filled with, at the same time, you know what I mean, then it starts to kind of run amok. So the whole point is that a lot of that excess energy is just that. It's the fact that like our body is a ball of energy. Like our brains are this massive amount of energy that are happening on a regular basis to run our bodies. But then the rest of that brain energy, fill in the blank. Either it's going towards your intuition, or it's going towards your psychic communication with your loved ones, that you think like, I need to call my mother, and then you call your mother and your mother's like, I was just talking about you.
Oh, I got goosebumps again.
Right, because it happens all the time.
Yeah, it does.
And something that I wanted to say, because of folks that I know that are working on balancing their chemicals out with medication, is that sometimes that is simply so that we can kind of still some of that energy so that we can make those decisions, you know what I mean? And I've definitely worked with people around self-medicating, or around like for instance, working with youth that are maybe have been medicated since they were young kids, like again, diagnosed with an ADHD or an ODD or something like oppositional defiance disorder, and basically like told that they have to take this medicine as soon as they're 4 years old, 5 years old, as soon as they get into preschool. And then talking to these youth when they're like 15 and asking them, like, do you remember not being medicated? And them actually having to deal with the fact that they're like, no, I can't remember not being medicated. So then also working with people to figure out, like, how do I create my own regulators, and so on and so forth. And oftentimes it's like, well, you need to get out of this environment, actually. You need to go somewhere where you can take pictures and people aren't going to yell at you because you're supposed to be doing something else, when you're actually, no, you're supposed to spend your 20s being a photographer. Maybe in your 30s you'll become a nurse. But in your 20s, you got to be a photographer for a little while, because there's other things that you need to find out about yourself before you're able to fully embrace who you're supposed to be. So again, it's like realizing that about ourselves. Like, we have all of this potential. We have all of this like constant communication that our brains are doing with the world, and realizing that, yes, 7 to 14% of that, depending on who you are, is allotted towards the task at hand. But the other 93 to, what did I say, 7 to 14, right? So another 93 to 86% is specifically for the sort of like gut feeling emotion that we're having. It's my organs running themselves. It's my heartbeat going up faster when I see that person that I have a crush on, or it's that feeling in my stomach that I get when I see somebody that later is going to be some very significant person in my life. You know what I mean? it's just endless when it comes to that. Like, it's vibration. The world is vibration.
Yeah.
And we can vibrate on the wavelengths that we want to. So, like, I can see Jupiter in the sky, and I can try to vibrate on that Jupiter wavelength because I know that those ripples that are happening, like you said, that butterfly that's fluttering in the wind, well, when the sun has a flare, the sky here turns green, you know, if you're at the right angle, right? So that's, again, that's a magnificent effect that happens. Like, what do we think is happening when the moon goes away? Nothing. When everything else in the world can't see anything at night, you think nothing is happening to us internally? No, it's got to be happening internally. Like, if the moon is controlling the tide swelling, if you've ever lived on the ocean, then you know when the moon is full, the tide is big.
Right.
When the moon is not full and it's new, the tide is small.
Right.
If I can understand that, I'm made of water.
Yeah.
And I spew fluid all the time, out of my eyes, out of my mouth, out of my genitals, out of my skin. Like, I'm constantly ebboning and flowing with the energies of the world and around me, you know?
Oh, I love that. I wanna hit on one more thing before we wrap up, or as we wrap up, and it's something that we talked about in our personal conversation, you and I, about sort of 2020 in general, and sort of the cosmic nature of just where we're at in our human history, in just kind of, we've been talking a lot about just sort of an individual level. And if we can think about sort of what are the stars or what is the universe sort of telling us about this, you know, time of change, of upheaval, of turnover, of whatever, because, you know, I think, you know, we're all feeling it. And what are your thoughts on? I know you have a couple thoughts on this.
Totally. It just makes me think of the waves of revolution. So if you go back and you kind of study like revolutionary times in the world's history, all over the world, not just in the States, but even if you just start with the States, 1776, like this Declaration of Independence in the States, and you see that around that time period, there were uprisings all over the world. There was a French Revolution that happened around then, there's a Haitian Revolution that happened then, plantations were getting overthrown all over the world at that point in time. And so you have this, again, this cosmic energy that's happening. Like, if you go far enough back, we're all the same thing, just on this blue planet that's floating around. So if there's a solar flare, that whole planet is dealing with that issue. So I oftentimes do think about that, like, and because I've heard from other people that are kind of in tune to this, to astrological histories and things like that, like where the planet was when the country itself was born. So like July 4th, 1776, like, what's the chart for America?
That's our birth
chart,
know what
I mean? Exactly. What's the birth chart of America? And a lot of people will say, like, well, we're actually, you know, you think about things like Saturn return, you turn 28 and this whole new thing happens. And then I talked to a friend recently, she's like, yeah, I'm on my second Saturn return, I'm 57. So it's come back around again. So then we think, like, well, where is America on its multiple Saturn return cycles? Or when we're in the kind of like universal retrograde, where is America in the retrograde? Or where is it in stationing direct and things like that? So we start to ask ourselves, like, what could possibly be happening universally that's affecting us on a planetary level, that's affecting us on a national level, that also has all of our own personal lives involved in all of this revolution and upheaval and brand new energy, you know what I mean? So that's kind of where my mind goes with it. I don't know the answers to any of that, but I know that I can ask myself, like, how is that relating to my own life, and how can I kind of move in a certain way, understanding that? Because it's like we said early on, we might beat ourselves up about not being able to do enough right now, or not being able to get it done right now, but we're not in a global situation that's allowing anything to be done right now, you know? So it doesn't make sense to try to push that energy against, like you said, don't push that boulder up the wall, there's a pandemic happening.
Right.
You know?
I think that's such an important takeaway for right now, because, you know, when living in sort of a society that's sort of like, you know, that race to the top, like that has been on this sort of hyperdrive of consumption, hyperdrive of production, like all of these things. And the universe is basically kind of putting the Jersey barriers and the roadblocks down and saying, you know, it's kind of forcing us all to stop, slow down, reevaluate, pivot, all, you know, the words of 2020. And I also was thinking about something as I'm listening to you that's so important, and I think it's kind of sort of related. But often we think that, you know, we have to have it all figured out by fill in the blank, like we have to have this accomplished by our 20s. We have to be in this kind of relationship by our 30s. We have to buy the house before 40. There's all these made up milestones. They are made up. They are socially constructed. I saw like something beautiful the other day sort of circulating online in my social media landscape about people who there's no age by which you should fall in love. Like there's no deadline for that. There's no deadline on sort of your career prospects or otherwise. To hear you speak of the teen that or 20 something that go and be a photographer right now. I think we do ourselves a disservice by saying you have to have it all figured out by the time you graduate, if you do go to college by 22 and be on the path that to me is just such a disempowering way of thinking about yourself and the world, and that we're all just sort of I want to continue to grow and evolve into the next thing. And we're not finished beings at all. So if you're out there and you're if you're in your 50s and you're searching for a great love, it's not too late. It's not like you missed the boat when you were 25, or however old you might be, and you're just starting to embark on a new career or something. Good for you. It's I don't ever want to be stuck. I just sort of like to blow up kind of these sort of fake milestones and ideas, and and again, knowing yourself or knowing your chart or reading the stars, when it's time, it's time. There is a time. There is a season. Turn. Right? What? I broke into song. But, it's
and air strumming.
Yeah. There was some air guitar there. And to have patience.
Because the seasons are turning.
Yeah.
You can't. One of the best quotes that I ever heard was you can't try to harvest an apple after you plant an apple seed. You can't just plant a seed and then dig it up.
Yeah.
Try to harvest. It's gotta go through the cycle. And if it's a plant, if it's a carrot, I gotta plant my carrot seed. I gotta let that carrot grow, and I gotta harvest that carrot when it's the time. If it's an apple, and I'm planting an apple tree, I gotta wait a while before that thing is producing to make my cider or my sauce or whatever it is. So it's there is a season. I can't plant my seeds in the wintertime here in Vermont.
Right.
Not outside.
Yeah.
They got to go in the spring so that I can harvest in the fall, period. Every single time. Whatever. You can't change that. So again, it just goes back into taking your power back, whether it's your own personal power around your own body's cycles and what your spiritual, emotional self is telling you in that moment, or it's taking back your long-term plans around. Nobody else can tell you where you need to be by the time you're 50, because chances are somebody who's telling you where you need to be by the time you're 50 is going to change their mind on where they need it to be by the time they're 60. Oh shit, I gotta buy a convertible. Or things like that. 2020, let's do away, at least in our generation, whether you're 65 or 80 or whatever, 16, let's do away with that need for the midlife crisis.
Yeah.
Let's read the map a little early before we get out on the road, and then we can decide how we want to navigate this world.
I love that. I think that's a great spot to end. And I've had so much fun talking about our mysticism, metaphysical stuff, astrology, all that, spirituality. And as always, this went by super fast. Yeah. We could probably talk for 2 more hours. We're so appreciative of you guys being on this journey with us, and have a listen. Don't forget to check out episodes 1 through 14, especially our favorite things episode. That was episode 14.
Happy birthday to Reb as well, talking about annual, actual cosmic events, that we're coming up, and that we've passed that 8-year mark right now. It's big,
Thank you so much.
Totally.
It's been a journey. Thank you guys again. My name is Sarah.
My name is Mujib.
Take care out there.